We're indeed fortunate to have him here tonight. And so, with no further ado, Roger Ailes, media maven.
Well, working in politics for 20 years, I got to know, well, 20 years ago or more, George and Barbara Bush. We became great friends. I want to say, as president, this man set a very high standard. His dedication to his family and his service to this country are unparalleled. At a time when many are questioning the integrity of politicians, it's important to remember no one ever questioned George Bush's integrity. And at a time when America's honor is on the line, no one ever held America's honor in such loving hands as George Bush. And you can say, Barbara Bush, as you know, will be known as one of the great, great first ladies of this land. I met them many years ago when I was a media consultant, and I always had trouble explaining to people what consultants do. And I found a story about two old ladies who had a big old black tomcat named Sylvester. And Sylvester was a kind of a pest, and he'd come in the morning, and they'd have to get up, and they'd go out at 11 o'clock at night, and they'd have to let him out. He'd go out into the night to do what tomcats are famous for, and then he'd come back at 5 in the morning and scratch on the door, and they had to get up, and they finally got fed up with it, and they decided, we're going to have Sylvester fixed. So they had Sylvester fixed, but it didn't work. He still goes out as at night, but he goes out as a consultant. I decided to get out of politics about 1992, and I became president of CNBC. But the herd mentality of news always bothered me. I'd gone to a lot of meetings and then read about them the next day in the paper, and that's not what happened. It just wasn't the truth. And it kept bothering me, and then in 1996, Rupert Murdoch asked me if I could create a cable news network that would compete with CNN. I thought about it for about a second and a half, and I said, yes, I think I can. At the time, it was a tough time because CNN was 17 years old and had Time Warner and a lot of money. MSNBC was launching, and that was a joint venture between GE and Microsoft, the number one, number two companies in the country. They had plenty of money. We started with about a third of the assets of either of those two networks. However, it worked out pretty well, and for the last 8 years, we have not lost a single day to either one of those networks. So, the country is split today, as you know, politically, and I think the media to some degree is split as well. And it's hard to figure out whether that's ever going to get back together, but I heard a story about a guy who was in a hot air balloon. He was lost, so he lowered his altitude on the balloon, and he spotted a guy down on the ground. And he descended a bit more, and then he yelled down to him, and he said, "Excuse me, could you help me?" And he went on to say, "Look, I promised a friend I'd meet him an hour ago, and I don't know where I am." So the guy on the ground consulted his GPS and replied, "You're in a hot air balloon approximately 30 feet off the ground. Elevation 2,346 feet above sea level. You're 31 degrees 14 minutes north latitude, 100 degrees 49 minutes west longitude." The guy in the balloon said, "You must be a conservative." And he said, "Well, I am. How'd you know that?" He said, "Well, everything you told me is technically correct, but I have no idea what to make of your information. In fact, I'm still lost. You haven't been very much help to me so far." And the other guy said, "Well, you must be a liberal." He said, "Well, I am. How'd you know that?" He said, "Well, you don't know where you are or where you're going or where you've been. You've risen where you are in hot air. You made a promise you don't know how to keep. You expect me to solve the problem. The fact is you're still in the same place where you were when you got here. Now it's my fault. But we're here tonight to talk a little bit about the state of the media today. I don't think it's a partisan comment for me to say that the media went in the tank for our current President, Barack Obama. At last year's White House Correspondents' Dinner, the President said, "I know you all voted for me," and the journalists in attendance stood, cheered, and applauded in agreement. And then he said, except you guys over here at the Fox News table, but there was a time when no politician would admit that affection from the media, nor would the media express that much infatuation with a candidate. Because we're supposed to not be a lapdog and not be an attack dog, but to be a watchdog. And that's the job. And so we're supposed to ask tough questions. But at this president's press conference with the New York Times reporter was the toughest question of the entire press conference, said, "How enchanted are you with your job?" Turns out he was quite enchanted with it, but everybody was kind of freaked out by that. Now, I have some hope for the press, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The state of the media right at the moment, the news media, is fear, because most news divisions are being cut back. Last week, 25% of the ABC News division was let go. CBS, hundreds of layoffs. CNN, hundreds of layoffs. MSNBC, hundreds of layoffs. Fox News, we're still hiring and expanding our coverage. Now, you can talk about it being old media or new media or some other problem, but the fact is you need people watching to get ratings. Yogi Berra once said, "If nobody wants to go to the ballpark, you can't stop them." If nobody wants to watch your programs, you can't stop them either. At Fox, we have hard news and we have opinion shows, just like newspapers have a front page and an op-ed page, and people know the difference. But it's hard to know what you're reading on the internet, because many of the websites are offering opinion as fact with very little context, and it's very hard to read that. So we don't, and I don't think any of the other guys do either, take web material directly to air, because we've got to vet it and verify it. I picked up Newsweek this week about the Iraq War, and they finally admitted the Iraq War had been won, and there was half a picture of George W. Bush. They couldn't go all the way and put his whole picture on. They gave him half a picture. Hell, even, well, not Joe Biden, he doesn't know. He took credit for it. But even Al Gore knows George Bush won that war. By the way, has anybody seen Al? I think he's up in the Northeast looking for a city without snow so we can have a global warming meeting. Newsweek and Time have simply made themselves irrelevant. If you look at them, they're very, very thin. Marlon, remember these, remember the days they used to have some material in there. Now they have no ads because nobody wants to spend money there. And in the end, you have to do that in media to stay alive. Let me address the accusations for a second that Fox is biased. This is a true statement. We have not had to take a story down in 13 years because it was wrong. Not one. The New York Times was hiring guys to make up stories. CBS News imploded. CNN paid out millions on Tailwind. We have none of those problems. Do we have more conservatives on than other channels? Yes. That's because the other channels have none.